So if you've ever thought about doing a little bit of a road trip while towing with your Rivian R1T, well, the quick answer is you shouldn't. In today's video, we'll tell you about my miserable charging experience while towing with my Rivian R1T. We'll also break down the range impact and the true cost when you're towing with this vehicle. Okay, so if you guys are new to the channel, this is my 2023 Rivian R1T quad motor setup with the Adventure package and the all-terrain package. So it has the beefier off-roadish tires. And so the overall range of this 135 kilowatt hour battery is about 315 miles in the conserve mode, and then in all-purpose mode somewhere around 285. And it's pretty true to those mileage estimates when you're driving in regular weather and not exceeding maybe 70, 80 miles per hour. So it's a pretty accurate estimate, and I actually did a test earlier on when I first purchased this vehicle, and I went on about a 315 mile round trip, and I got home with just about like 2 or 3 miles of range left. So it was pretty accurate. That said, in my charging experience that I'm gonna be talking about in today's video, it was much worse than those figures. So let me give you guys the background. So I live in northern Utah, and a buddy of mine needed some help transporting some furniture and home stuff down about 255 miles or so south to a place in southern Utah. And he asked for my help for this process. And I was, happy to help out. I figured it'd be a good test for me to see what the range impact is on a longer road trip. And so this was a good experiment. So I obviously was happy to do it. And for this trip, I had to rent a U-Haul trailer because there's only so much that can fit inside of my little 4.5-foot truck bed and the interior components. And so I rented a 14-foot U-Haul trailer, and overall the experience hooking it up and everything like that was like any other truck or any other SUV I've owned. You have the trailer hitch, you connect them together, and then I had to get an adapter for I think I have a 6-pin adapter for my wiring harness from the Rivian to the 4-pin or 5-pin that's in the U-Haul. They actually sold the adapter, so I bought it there. But as soon as I clicked it together, my infotainment screen immediately came up with the towing information. It even gives you an estimated weight. It tells you your range impact. So there's a lot of good info, very similar to any other pickup truck in 2025. You plug it in, it automatically senses the trailer, and it gives you a lot of good information. So from that standpoint, very smooth, very easy. In terms of just regular, acceleration and pickup, as soon as I left the U-Haul dealership, very easy, very smooth. It's very hard to tell that you have a trailer hooked up next to you, or behind you, I should say. Really, the biggest indicator, it feels like maybe there's a little bit more resistance on the pedal, but honestly, that might be more the drive mode, automatically switching to the tow haul mode versus usually I drive in all-purpose mode, and it's a little bit less resistance on the accelerator. Now, one caveat to that is when I do road trips, for the most part, I put it into conserve mode, which shuts off the rear motors, I believe. I always forget them, which ones it is, but it shuts off 2 of the motors, and so you're really only running on 2 motors, which means you're more efficient. When you hook up a trailer, you automatically disable the conserve mode, so you're always gonna have power going to all 4 wheels. And for obvious reasons, you're gonna want more torque to be able to pull a trailer. You don't wanna put as much pressure onto just the 2 motors. So it makes sense why it does that, but of course that definitely impacts your range. And so anyways, I set off from my house, driving, it's about a 4-hour drive, but it's 255 miles. And I had planned out that this trip normally, without towing a trailer, would take about 1 stop in a place that I like to stop to mostly is in Beaver, Utah, and there's a Tesla supercharger there. And so I've stopped there once before in the Rivian when I was not towing. And so this was like, okay, I figure if I'm towing a trailer that's about 3,500 pounds with just a bunch of, house stuff in it, different appliances, et cetera, it would probably take me 2 stops to get to the same destination versus 1 stop when I'm not towing. That was generally true, but there were a lot of issues along the way. So my first stop was planned at a Tesla supercharger station about an hour or so from my house. I figured I'd get a little bit of a, charge, a little bit of juice, and then continue on my way to Beaver, Utah, which is the place where I figured I'd get kind of the biggest, deepest charge, and then obviously hit that place on the way back when I'm driving back home. Well, I get to the Nephi station and I have the Tesla supercharger adapter. It's actually sitting in the back seat. And I plug it in. And one caveat to that is if you guys have ever towed with an electric vehicle, the crappy part is the infrastructure isn't really made for towing. And what I mean by that is when you pull up to a station, Most of the time it's just a pull in, pull out situation, which is fine. Like if you know how to handle a trailer, you can do that. But typically there's not much space behind for vehicles to kind of pull through and pull around the trailer. Usually it's like a pretty tight spot where you pull in, and then if you're having a trailer, you're gonna block pretty much all the lanes, you know, to the right or left of you, depending on where the road is coming from. And so you generally try to find a place where you can pull through so that you're not in anybody's way. The second complication to having a non-Tesla vehicle and charging at a Tesla supercharger station is my charging port is on the front left versus the rear right, I believe rear right for Tesla. So it's opposite of what a Tesla is. And the problem with that is when you park a non-Tesla vehicle at a Tesla supercharging station, you're technically blocking two spots unless you can kind of get the edge spot or anything like that. And on top of that, I'm having a trailer. So there's two kind of difficulties where I don't want to be in anybody's way. I don't want to obstruct a charging station because, you know, the amount of stations are not really increasing, but the amount of electric vehicles are. And so it's, you know, I don't want to be that guy. And so in Nephi, as I'm pulling in, I'm hoping there's some good pull-through spots. And lo and behold, as I pull up to this Nephi station, or I should say the Tesla station in Nephi, Utah, there is a row of Tesla superchargers, but it's facing, or the back of it is a gas station parking lot. And I thought, this is perfect. I'm going to pull through on the gas station side and hook up to the, you know, one of the chargers on the other side. The cable is just long enough to reach my vehicle. So I, you know, pull up, I plug in, I get the adapter hooked up, everything's good. I've done this before. And my gauge cluster screen keeps saying starting, and it's got this pinwheel of death that just keeps circulating and circulating. You know, a couple minutes go by and I'm like, this is not normal. Usually it starts at this point. And so I unplug, I pull back a little bit to another station, not even connected in the same row, kind of like a separate substation, hook into that one. Nothing works. And then all of a sudden I see another Tesla vehicle that has left. So I know that station works because a Tesla just used it. I pull into that one and plug in. And again, nothing. It just keeps doing this rotating wheel of starting. But there's no charge actually entering the vehicle. And so at this point, I'm getting a little bit frustrated because I don't want to unhook the trailer. And also at the same time, this should be working. So, you know, it's a Tesla charger. I have the adapter. So I call Rivian, and I'll caveat this by saying I am probably more educated in electric vehicles than the average person. I'm not an expert. There's definitely people on YouTube that know way more about EVs than I do, but I would argue I know probably a little bit more than the average person. And so I've done a lot of research on electric vehicles, which is why I decided to take the leap and try an EV, is because I'm like, you know, I know them pretty well. And I also was under the understanding that if you have the Tesla adapter, it works for every single Tesla supercharger. And I would be wrong. So when I called Rivian and I explained where I was, they said, oh, that side of the Tesla supercharger station does not permit any vehicles, or at least it does not permit Rivians. Maybe it permits Fords. I don't know the answer to that, but definitely Rivians are not permitted in that station. And I'm like, okay, well, on the map, it says there's a Tesla supercharger here and it works. So where is this charger? Well, on the other side of this restaurant parking lot that has, you know, this Tesla supercharger, which is next to the gas station, there's the other side that does allow other vehicles, including my Rivian. So I decide to pull through onto the other side, only to find out that there is barely enough space for even my width of vehicle to fit through and park, let alone actually have a trailer that's attached to it. I don't even know how I would pull into a parking spot. I'd probably take up like the entire row of superchargers at that point. And I became really frustrated because there was no information of that in the infotainment screen. There was no indication of that on the gauge cluster telling me, by the way, this is only for Teslas. Nothing. I had to really spend time calling the Rivian service center or whoever to tell me that. And then on top of it, I can't even go to the area that does permit Rivian vehicles because I have to disconnect the trailer. And the problem is my U-Haul trailer didn't come with any pegs or stops or anything like that. And so if I unhook the trailer, there's a chance that that thing is rolling down the hill. And mind you, this trailer has about 3,500 pounds of weight inside of it. So for me to actually lift it up physically and put it on the ground, because it doesn't have one of those pegs that, you know, lift up the vehicle as you crank it, that would require a lot of strength. So there was just no feasible way for me to actually disconnect my trailer just so I could charge at the station. So that was frustration number one. The second frustration happened when I decided, you know what, I'm gonna, screw it. I'm leaving this station. There's another station in Scipio, Utah, which is about another 80 miles away. call it maybe another hour or so away from where I was in Nephi, Utah. And Scipio has, I believe it was Electrify America stations, not Tesla's. And I figured, you know what? Okay, I'm going to charge there. So that experience actually went pretty okay. I went there, I charged. I was only at a 150 kilowatt charger. And so I didn't get as much juice as I could have, but I stayed there for 30 minutes or so, got enough to get to my next station, which was Beaver, Utah, about another hour away. And so already I'm at charge number 3, but I've only charged twice when I get to Beaver. And Beaver has a similar situation where only one row of stations allow Rivians. And it's funny because well, I guess funny, not really funny. It's more of a observation or a realization that the reason that earlier in the summertime when I did this trip without a trailer, just for fun, kind of on a vacation, I stopped this one row of Tesla chargers and it wouldn't work. And I just figured, oh, it might be some sort of glitch. And, you know, I plugged into a different station. Well, now I know that apparently only certain Tesla stations allow other third-party vehicles, or at least Rivians, which is a shocker to me. I don't understand it. If you're already paying the fee, like I get you want to limit certain vehicles to, you know, Tesla to have that competitive advantage. But at the same time, if you're opening up stations already, just open it up to all cars. It doesn't make sense. There's no signs anywhere to say otherwise. It's just, I'm going to get off my soapbox here, but it really just pissed me off. It makes no sense. Anyways, I charged at Beaver. I made it to my destination. We were fine. Now, on the way back, I figured, you know what? I'm going to do this a little bit differently because now I know what stations work, what stations have pull-throughs, etc. The one I stopped at in Scipio, Utah, happened to be in an area that's in a semi-truck parking lot, and so you have plenty of space to pull in and pull out with a trailer because there's tons of pull-around space around you. So I figured I'd stop at that one, I'd stop at Beaver, yada, yada, yada. So the one-way trip took me about what in a gas car would take 4 hours. It took me about 7.5 hours because of these issues where I had to stop and wait and everything. I figured on the way back, it would probably be closer to maybe 6 hours. I'd stop for an hour, hour and a half, you know, and there's your, 5.5, 6 hours. So I began on the journey back and I was again hauling the same U-Haul trailer, 14-footer. It had about 3,500 to 4,500 pounds in it. The vehicle kind of kept shifting what the weight was. It would tell me on the infotainment screen. And so we get, to the first station in Beaver. I charge, everything's good. I start heading up to Scipio, and I get to the Scipio station, and this is, I believe, Labor Day weekend. So it's a pretty busy weekend, and all of the 4 or 5 Electrify America stations at Scipio are booked. So I'm standing in a line with a Hyundai Ioniq 5 in front of me, and I'm like kind of gauging what the speeds are of these cars that are charging. And I'm like, the Ioniq 5 is on the 800 volt architecture. It's going to be pretty quick, and then there's an Electrify America station that has a 350 kilowatt speed versus the 150 that I charged at several days earlier. And so I'm hoping to shoot for the 350 because my max peak rate is about 220 in the Rivian. So I figured that would make it a little bit quicker. Anyways, the vehicle in front of me goes to the station. It's the Ioniq 5. It charges very quickly. And within probably about 15 minutes, that spot opens up and it happens to be the 350 kilowatt station. So I'm thinking, perfect. I pull in, I plug in, and I get this error on my gauge cluster screen saying something along the lines, and I didn't take a photo of it because I was kind of flustered and I was really just wanting it to charge because I have a baby in the car. I have a dog that does not like cars. It's panting the whole time. So I'm really just kind of in a stressful situation already. And so I plug in, but it said on the screen something along the lines of, the plug is too hot. Try unplugging and plugging it back in. So I do that and I do it again. And I do it again. And in between, I wait maybe 2 or 3 minutes and I try all these different things. I even reset the car with the left and the right steering wheel buttons, holding it down. Same error keeps coming up. At this point, I'm getting more annoyed because for some reason my car just doesn't want to accept this charge and I don't get why it thinks it's too hot. And so I call up Rivian while I was trying to find the number for the Electrify America station. And Rivian does a hard reset where I hold the SOS button or the hazard button and the left steering wheel. I reset it. Again, the same issue happens after the reset. At this point, I've spent about 20 to 25 minutes, not even just at the station because I was already waiting in line. I'm talking at the actual charger. I've spent about 20 minutes trying to get it to troubleshoot and it does not want to start charging my vehicle. Mind you, one station is down, the other ones are occupied. And as I'm on the phone with Rivian, all of a sudden a 150 kilowatt station opens next to me. There's nobody waiting in line. I quickly pull out, pull back in and plug into that one and it starts charging. Thankfully, I get a little bit of a charge. But what I find out from Rivian is they're saying, oh, this is Electrify America issue because, you know, your car is perfectly fine. It's just, it must be something wrong with that particular station plug. And I said, well, there was a vehicle just there, like a minute before I pulled in, and it was working and everything. Like, yeah, well, maybe within that minute, something went wrong. And I said, you know what, whatever. As I'm charging at this 150 kilowatt station, another, I think it was a Subaru no, it was a Toyota Toyota BZ4X pulls in, plugs in, and immediately starts charging. I even asked the person, I'm like, oh, is your vehicle charging? Yeah, no problems. This was about 1 minute after I pulled out from my station and pulled into this 150 kilowatt. That Toyota BZ4X pulled in and started charging. So it was clearly not an issue with the station. It was an issue with my Rivian. Just a terrible experience. It was so frustrating that my car, which is technically, and not to insult Toyota BZ4X users, but the Rivian is a much more technologically advanced vehicle. It's got much better software, it's got better battery technology, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, the entry-level electric vehicle, BZ4X, happened to be charging much easier than my Rivian R1T. I would have rather had the BZ4X in that moment than I would have had my Rivian. And so we charged there for about an hour because it's a slower charger. The peak I can get is 150, and it slowly tapered down to like 100. And I finally was able to make it back home. And yet again, because of all the troubleshooting and all the wasted time, it took me about 7 to 7.5 hours to make what would have been in a gas vehicle a 4-hour trip. Terrible experience, and maybe very, very frustrated and annoyed at Rivian and its reliability. It all comes down to the reliability or dependability of this vehicle. When I need it most, this vehicle has honestly failed me. Getting off my story on that, I want to talk about the range impact and the costs because there's quite a bit to unpack there. So this trip is 255 miles. I've made it once before, and since that trip I did with the trailer, I've made it again without a trailer in this vehicle. So I can tell you that generally speaking, I can make, on a full charge in conserve mode with what my gauge cluster says is 312 miles, I can make it down to Beaver, Utah, which is the Tesla supercharger station, with about 70 or so miles left. I charge there for about 30 minutes to an hour, and I make it to my destination, so that finishes off the 255-mile one-way trip. I do the same thing on the back way. I stop in Beaver, and then I make the trip back. Now, when you're talking about the range impact, without a trailer on that trip, when I'm going on Interstate 15, going 80, 85, sometimes obviously, 90 miles an hour to pass somebody on the freeway, you're exceeding what is generally considered good speed for an EV, because the higher the speeds you go, the more of the range impact. I have noticed that at those highway speeds, the interstate speeds where you're going 80 to 85 miles an hour, my range is about 20 to 22% worse than what it would be on the screen. So if it tells me 312 miles, realistically, I'm only getting about 244 miles of range. So in this situation where I start with 312 miles of range and I drive down to Beaver, Utah, and I arrive at 75 miles of range according to the gauge cluster, I should technically have 122 miles if that beginning range of 312 was accurate. So you can technically take a 22% discount, and that's how much range is my real starting range, because it's just not very accurate when you're going at 80, 85 miles an hour. To translate that into miles per kilowatt, at those types of highway speeds, I'm getting about 1.81 miles per kilowatt hour. I have a 135 kilowatt hour battery pack. I'm gonna say that's all usable, even though it's technically not. If you times that by 1.81, that's how you're gonna get your 244 miles of true range when you're going at highway speeds. Now, when you're towing with a trailer, that range is much worse than the 1.81 miles per kilowatt hour. In my experience, when I took the 14-foot trailer with about 3,500 pounds of weight in it, and I got to Scipio at 30%, I ran the numbers and I did the math, and it's about 2 miles of electric range for every 1 mile of travel. So when you do the math and convert it into miles per kilowatt, you're about 1.1 miles per kilowatt hour. So technically at 135 kilowatt hour battery pack, you're getting just around 150 miles of range in real life usage, real life range, versus the 313 that it would show you at full power. Now, granted, when you put it into tow haul mode, it doesn't actually show you 313 miles. It obviously counts down and it adjusts real time as you're driving based on the weight of the vehicle. But I'm just using that as a proxy to let you know that it's about half the range of what it showed in conserve mode at a full battery. It's about 150 miles of range, which is pretty abysmal considering a 3,500 pound trailer is really not that much weight. And 150 miles of range to go from pretty much 100 to 0 is really poor performance. If you're curious on how I ran the numbers with towing a trailer, the 30% range that I arrived at in Scipio implied that I used about 220 miles, or I drove 220 miles in that distance to get to 30% range, when in reality, I actually only drove about 110. So it's about half the stated range when you have the vehicle in conserve mode. Now, lastly, I want to talk about the cost. One thing I want to level set is at-home charging is significantly less expensive than gas. I will tell you that in my over a year of ownership of this vehicle, I ran the numbers comparing my electricity bill from the same period in the prior year before I had an EV to the same period or same month after I had an EV. And on average, my price has gone up. My electricity bill is up anywhere from $90 to $100 a month. Let's just say $100 a month is how much I am paying extra for the privilege of charging my vehicle at home. And the cost of that is about 16 cents per kilowatt hour. So you can do the math, multiply that by 135 if you want to find out from 0 to 100 how much it's going to cost to charge. And in comparison, when I had my 2021 Ford Bronco with the 2.3 liter EcoBoost, driving about the same amount of miles I do in this vehicle, I was paying about 180, 185 bucks a month on gas. So the difference between that is about 80 to 90 bucks a month that I'm saving by charging this vehicle at home. So it definitely is a cost savings. Now, where you're losing money is when you're taking this vehicle on a road trip, because I find it can be significantly higher charging an EV than it is driving a gas car and refueling it on the trip, because the cost of fuel is about the same. You know, yeah, of course, in California, it can be $5 a gallon, and in Utah, it could be $3.80. But generally, if you're traveling within the same state, you're give or take 50 cents, about the same amount per gallon. Electricity is quite a bit of a bigger delta between at home and superchargers. For comparison, the Tesla supercharger that I stop at in Beaver charges about 52 cents per kilowatt hour to charge there versus the 16 cents that I get charged at home. So it's nearly 3 or 4 times more to charge at a Tesla supercharger than it is at home. The Electrify America that I stopped at in Scipio was somewhere around, I think, 55 or 56 cents. So it's even more expensive than the Tesla charger. So when you run the numbers, what I find is when you're going at these highway speeds without a trailer and you're going about 1.81 miles per kilowatt hour, you are paying about 20% more when it comes to electricity cost than it would be in a comparative gas vehicle. And the vehicle that I use to compare this truck to is a, call it GMC Sierra 1500. It's a 6.2 liter V8. And I actually drove that car on a very similar trip recently. And I compared the gas price using premium 91 octane, that's the highest we get here in Utah. It's about $3.80 a gallon. I think it's gone down since I did the trip. And I actually have the stats here. So to travel 300 miles in a gas truck, again, a 6.2 liter V8 that I'm estimating gets around 16 mpg, which in reality, that's more of a city number than a highway number. I think on highway, you can get closer to 18, 19 miles per gallon. But assuming worst case at 16 miles per gallon, you'll use about, call it 18.75 gallons of fuel. If we use about a $3.80 per gallon, assuming premium, you're gonna pay about $71.25 to refuel your gas vehicle to go 300 miles. Comparatively, to travel 300 miles in an EV, you'll use up 166 kilowatt hours. I'm using the Rivian as a comparison. Obviously, if you have something more efficient, you can use that. But 300 miles will use 166 kilowatts if I'm using the 1.8 mile per kilowatt math. At 52 cents per kilowatt hour, I will spend $86, so about 15 bucks or 20% more than I would using a comparative gas vehicle. And again, that's using a very not fuel efficient pickup truck, a 6.2 liter V8 versus a Rivian R1T. So it's a pretty crude calculation. You can get even more extreme if you use a more fuel efficient truck, like maybe the F-150 hybrid. You're probably gonna get a little bit better MPG, and then your delta is gonna be even more. Maybe you're closer to 25, 30% savings when it comes to costs over a 300 mile trip. The other thing to consider here is time. I can't actually travel 300 miles realistically without stopping and charging at least once, versus a gas car. I can go and, you know, fuel up in like 5-10 minutes max. This thing's gonna take at least 30 minutes to an hour for me to make that exact same journey. Now, when you're towing, the story gets even worse. Like I said, you're about half the range you would be when you're not towing, which that generally just means your cost is gonna be twice as more than when I'm not towing this vehicle. So instead of spending, call it 86 bucks to go 300 miles in this vehicle, you're gonna spend closer to $170 to go that exact same distance because you have to double that amount. And that's when it becomes truly just absurd to tow with this vehicle long distance. I cannot more strongly recommend you do not tow with a trailer and do long distance travel and expect to save any type of money, because you're simply just not. Not only are you gonna lose time because you have to stop twice as many times, you're also gonna pay double the amount because you're that much inefficient when you're towing with a trailer. Now, that being said, if you have a more efficient EV, you're probably gonna get a lot more range and you're gonna get a little bit closer to the cost. But then again, there's not that many EVs that can tow, 10, 15,000 pounds. Usually you have to go into the truck segment or the Rivian segment, and that's where you're not gonna get a very efficient EV. And so we're not talking about a Leaf towing a 3,500 pound trailer. That's just not gonna happen. And so it's really disappointing, and I'm just here to be upfront and honest with you that I would never do it again. In fact, when I had to make that trip again later in the year, I ended up taking my dad's GMC Sierra 1500. That's how I know these numbers. And I stopped, I think, once for gas along the way, even while towing a trailer, and I saved myself money in the process. It doesn't make any sense to do that. Now, to sum it up, I also did the math where I compared the efficiency of the GMC Sierra 1500 and the Rivian R1T without towing a trailer for both vehicles. And I wanted to find out at what point is there cost parity. And that means that at what point is it the same exact cost to drive my Rivian and charge it on a road trip versus driving my father's GMC Sierra and fueling that up at a truck stop. And I found that efficiency number is, if you can get more than 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour in the Rivian, you're actually gonna save money when it comes to charging because it's gonna be a little bit less expensive. Now, I have not been able to manage 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour outside of driving in the city, regular highways, stuff like that, anything under 70, 75 miles an hour. As soon as you start hitting the long stretches of interstate, where here in Utah, you can go up to 80, even I've seen people going 90, even though that's above the speed limit. 80, 85 is usually where the speed limit is. You're not gonna be able to get that 2.2 miles per kilowatt. So that just further reinforces the fact that if you are gonna be road tripping and you wanna save money, gas is the way to go. Now, if you're driving in the city, if you're always parking it at home and charging it on your 16 cents per kilowatt hour, you're gonna be saving a significant amount of money at home. But towing and even non-towing road trips in an EV, it's gonna cost more, it's gonna take more time, and honestly, it's simply just not worth it. Well, there you have it, folks. That was a little bit of a longer video, but I wanted to break down my experience, the range impact, because I didn't know this going into it, and I think it's good information to know, and also the true cost. I think a lot of people lie about the cost of these things. Oh, it's so much savings and money and everything like that, and the truth is if you're charging at home, yes, it is, but if you're taking this on a road trip, or if you want to hook up anything to it, because this is technically an overlanding vehicle and you want to put some more, stuff in the cargo bed and add some more weight to it, you're going to start losing efficiency, and that means you're going to have to be paying a lot more money than you would in a comparative gas vehicle. So if you're the type of person that wants to take road trips in a Rivian, just be ready to pony up a little bit more when it comes to refueling this vehicle than you would with a comparative gas vehicle with a pretty big V8. That finishes off today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Schwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.